Hi, my dragons. Welcome to my den. Yes, I'm wearing a Tiffin University hoodie because, yes, I know it's 90 degrees outside and it's crazy hot. But I am inside with my nice, cool air conditioner right there and a balmy 61 degrees in here because I like the cold. I'm still under quarantine. Oh my God, it's terrible. Until I get my result back. I had my test yesterday as per my doctor's orders, and I'm waiting for hopefully a negative result. I have just a few symptoms, but I don't know if they're symptoms or allergies, so we're playing it safe. Yeah. But anyway, in the meantime, we're going to continue with Lecture 2. Still doing the historical stuff about psychology and law, and I'm hoping that you find it as fun and exciting as I do. Okay, so I'll be putting up this PowerPoint and a forum assignment for you too. So, psychology and law. So psychology and law are two different disciplines with very different foundations and beliefs and implementations and things like that. So it's very interesting. There are differences in assumptions between psychology and law, so we're going to start there and look at what the law says and what psychology says. And they're often at loggerheads, you know. They have different sorts of training and different sorts of things. We're going to go into what makes a psychologist, a forensic psychologist, a psychologist, and what goes into that training. And then I'm hoping we're back for that because that's always a really interesting class and depressing kind of class when you hear what's in the future for those of you who want to pursue either higher education in terms of a master's or a doctorate in psychology or some related area, or a law degree, okay? But we'll tackle that next time. So they do have different assumptions, and sometimes they're seen as being at odds, but they're both very, very interesting, fascinating, both of them. So some of the topics in forensic psychology looking at its application to the law and in the courts and in practice and things like that, they make different broad assumptions that sometimes put them at loggerheads with each other, okay? So as we talked about before a little bit, free will and determinism. Determinism in psychology, we think that, you know, the situation has plans for you. There are things beyond your control that sometimes we as humans encounter. You've heard of the popular saying, shit happens. That's determinism, okay? Sometimes despite your best efforts, things happen and you can't control it, okay? And it's a real big part of social psychology from which forensic psych developed. And in that, determinism thinks that some things are determined, behavior is determined. We can put you in different situations in social psychology, and we can predict with pretty good accuracy how you're going to react, okay? So we tend to underplay that in the United States because in the United States, you know, we're Americans. We make our own destiny. We're cool. We're independent. We bend things to the will. The situation doesn't control us, but really, the research shows otherwise. Yes, sometimes you walk into a situation and it has a great determinant factor on how you will behave. Okay, and you don't even have to think of legal things like that. You know that when you go into a library, you're supposed to be a little bit quieter. You know that when you go into church, you're not supposed to raise hell. Or, you know, the situation always has demand characteristics. That's what we call it, okay? So psychologist believes that situation is a primary, strong, and insurmountable determinant of behaviors. And that we as psychologists think that, you know, the law is foolish to think that as human beings you aren't dictated by your surroundings. The situation has plans for you, as we like to say, okay? The law likes free will, and Americans like free will. We like to think that we're the captains of our ship, the masters of our universe. And we don't like to admit that. You know, sometimes you find yourself in a situation that you have no control over because we don't like that. We like to have control over the situation. So you see that today in coronavirus, right? We like to think that we're in control of coronavirus. And coronavirus keeps showing us that you are not in control, right? That's a very good example. So how do we try and get control of the coronavirus? Well, we try and do things to exert some sort of control. Like we're going to protest wearing masks. We're going to protest, keeping things closed. We're going to try and impeach the governor. We're going to do all these things to show that, yes, we are still the masters of the universe. And, the situation does have plans for you. So there you go. So the law has to reconcile that. Oh, yes, someone's trying to call me, so I'm just going to ignore that. So the role of situation is not considered a major factor in the law, but it really is a major factor in psychology. So psychology and the law are often at odds with each other, and they do have basic fundamental philosophical differences. So as I mentioned before, we see this in mental health, when you talk about mental health factors and the law. So we have clients who come before the court, and they may not be mentally able to take part in their own defense, or they may be incompetent to stand trial, and they may have committed crimes where their behavior is a direct result of their physical or mental status. Okay, the court often struggles with that, to the extent that we had to create mental health laws, mental health courts, drug courts, and systems like that. Okay, interpersonal violence, domestic violence, syndrome evidence. We're gonna have some famous syndrome cases, and some, especially when we get to insanity. That's very controversial about what people should be held responsible and what they shouldn't be held responsible for. So the law doesn't like that. The law says, hey, you did it, you did the crime, now you have to pay, you have to do the time. And psychologists don't see things in black and white like that. We see things in terms of gray. This is why this PowerPoint this week is on gray. See how that was a little subtle thing? There you go. So let me give you some examples of where you really see the differences between psychology and law in situations that may face the court. First, let's talk about juries, okay? Juries are made up of normal people. So when you put normal people together, depending on how many, again, that's something that's unsettled in the law, but you put people in a pool together to make a decision. A lot of times psychologists see that is the very act of having juries is a controversial thing, and you're going to learn a lot about juries this semester, because I could talk forever about juries, and I've done a lot of jury consulting. I've even worked with different governments about should they have juries and should they not have juries. And Americans like juries because it goes back to our history. We talked about John Peter Zenger and jury nullification. So Americans like juries because we like to think that we're getting a fair shake. We should be talking with a jury of our peers, okay? And so one of the things that happens with juries is they're the ones, if they have a jury trial, they're the ones that make the decision. Now, there are two types of juries. There are decisional juries. Their word is final. And there are informational juries, which they give information to the judge about what they think, and then the judge makes the final decision. We're going to cover all that when we talk about juries. But one example about juries in psychology and law is cognitive processing. So everybody brings into the courtroom, if you're on a jury, their own style, their own way of processing information. And human beings are lazy processors. We try to get to the bottom line. Stop telling me the whole story. Don't try and cloud this story with facts. Just give me the bottom line. And we find that to be true. Cognitive psychologists have found that to be true. In study after study after study, that is really a robust finding. So there's a plethora of research that's out there that give insights into how juries process information that can really help the legal system. One of the problems with the legal system and information that's out there for free, all they have to do is go to the library or go online and look for research literature, research studies from psychology, and they will research psychology, and they'll have the keys to the city, the way to win cases, because it's all about human behavior and the ways humans think. But because there's no requirement for them to do research or to study published information or even to understand published information, because they don't have to take research methods like you do, they don't really make use of all this when really they could to their own advantage. They can make a lot of money if they did this. But it's okay because, then they'll hire forensic psychologists and we'll tell them how to do it. So we intuitively, in psychology, know that there's just so much information you can handle, and this class is going to make you feel like your head is exploding. Oh my God, you're breaking my brain with so much information. But it's good, because we intuitively know that, that there are mechanisms by which we think and how we think and what our cognitive load is going to be, all of that kind of thing. And so researchers in forensic psych and cognitive psych, social psychology, there's an area now called social cognition, which talks about things like juries and how they make decisions and things like that. And this is what I did my dissertation on, so I'm going to talk about this forever. Research in juror competence, that's what I did my research on. I did it on an actual trial that was happening. So it was even more exciting, right? It shows that, when trials become really exhaustive and really long and complex, that really drains someone's cognitive resources, okay? Imagine if you're called to sit in on a jury and the case just has so much information and complex information that you may not understand, and you're just sitting there hopelessly going, I will never understand this. Oh my God, I gave you the example of the elderly lady in the jury trial who said those words just came out of his mouth like bullets because, number one, it was long and complex. Number two, it was in a field that she didn't understand. Epidemiology, she's a housewife, for Pete's sake. Why would she have to worry about that? And that's what you're asked jurors to do all the time in a court case. And if any place or any application really needed some input from cognitive psychologists, there you go. That is a really interesting area, okay? Let me give you an example, and this is a great example in the PowerPoint. Here's a case, In re U.S. Financial Securities litigation, okay? It produced 15,000 pages of depositions, 5 million documents. This is what the jury had to go through. 800 pages required just to outline the litigation plans. All of the paperwork, if they stacked it up, would have been a 40-foot pile of papers, 40 feet, for those jurors to go through and make a decision. The plaintiffs alone had to call 250 witnesses and enter 12,000 documents. So when I started doing research on juror competence, I actually had people, I gave them a test on a very long case. It was a toxic tort. And I said, gave them a test about who said what in the case. Who said this piece of evidence? Who said that piece of evidence? Who testified this way? Who testified that way? And you know what? They failed the test. And these were actual jury-eligible individuals who said, you know what, it's too confusing. What are we supposed to do? So the law needs to look at that and not think that, hey, the jurors will be able to handle this. Because guess what? In a complex case like that, jurors can't handle that. It's too much information. So jurors the law needs to understand that. In re Japanese electronics antitrust litigation. Oh my God. Can you imagine having to sit through a case on a topic that you don't really even like and try and understand it and know that your decision is going to be really important for the outcome of the case? Yeah, okay. This case had 20 million documents and entered 10,000 pages of deposition, and they had to translate it from Japanese to English. It took over a year to just complete that. So you can imagine how much the jurors really understood that, really wanted to sit on that case. Yeah, no. Very difficult for jurors. Really put a strain on their cognitive demand. ILC Peripherals Leasing Corporation versus IBM, 87 witnesses. I mean, people can keep track of 2 or 3 people and who said what. Never mind 87 witnesses being called to testify, 23,000 exhibits, 96-day trial period, and the jury deliberated for 19 days and they gave up and said, you know what? We don't even understand this. Never mind deliberate over it, okay? So those are juror complexity examples. Let me go to part 2 of this. I can talk about this for all day because it's really, really fascinating to me. And I hope you come to love it as much as I do in terms of an intellectual pursuit. But anyway, I'll go on to part 2 of this lecture in 1 second.